Welcome, everybody. This is Jane Gardner of Finding Your Purpose TV. And today on Finding Your Purpose Spotlight, we're talking to Jann Fried, a Ph.D. doctor. Sorry, my apologies, Jann. Dr. Jann Fried, Ph.D. She was a college professor of business management and leadership. And after 30 years as a tenured professor and an endowment chair, she started an encore career as a leadership development and change management consultant. And she is the author of several books and co-author of at least 5 books. And her last book is Leading with Wisdom, Sage Advice from 100 Experts, which we'll be talking about. And we'll also be talking about her new book. So Jann, welcome. Please just say hello and say hello.
I'm pleased to be here, and it was nice to make a connection with Jane, and thank you very much for inviting me to your show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jann. One of the things that I love to talk about with people is finding their purpose. And obviously you've been doing your purpose for a long time. But I'd like to talk about your new purpose, which is the leadership development and change management consultant, and how you got to that journey, because of course, previously you were in academics. So thank you, Jann. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So I fell into higher education teaching and absolutely loved it. Taught a lot of different courses, but I had to drive 2 hours a day, an hour each way to get to my work. And when my kids graduated from college, my husband said, we can afford to take a risk. You're tired of driving. And I was at the stage in my life where I wanted to give back to the community, and I couldn't give back to the community where I lived because I worked out of town, and I couldn't give back to where I worked because I lived out of town. So I had to make a change, and I have not looked back. Fortunately, I was able to teach a graduate leadership course for a different university for the past 10 years. So I kept my foot into teaching. And as a leadership development person, I do workshops, I do speaking, I do some coaching, and it's really the same skill set that I enjoyed so much when I was teaching full time. So I eliminated grading papers, which is always kind of the hardest part about teaching. So I don't have to do that, and I can still use some of the same, skills. And I have just loved it. And so that's kind of been my journey, taking the same skills that I like to use, but to a different audience.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great. And I guess you probably started writing books when you were in academics, because that's probably one of the requirements. But you're now doing, maybe you could tell us when you started your leadership book, Leading with Wisdom, and that you're writing a new one, and what we can claim from that.
No, that's good, Jane. I really started the leadership book. I was on sabbatical in 2004, 2005, and my oldest son was graduating from high school, and I wanted to be home more with, since that was his last year home. But in order to get a sabbatical, I had to have a research project. So I started this project, and it's kind of interesting. I met Jim Collins, author of Good to Great, and he was speaking at a big presentation, giving a big presentation where I live, and I was able to kind of chat with him afterwards. And in talking with him, he said, give me a call. We'll talk about this. Because I asked if I could be an apprentice, if I could come study under him. I said I was going to be on sabbatical, and, I wanted to learn from him. Would that be possible? And he said, well, I've never had anybody ask me that before. So he said, why don't you give me a call? So I called him, and we had a conversation. He said, you don't need to come learn from me. He said, let's just talk about what it is you want to do. So he asked me several questions, and I said, well, I love to interview people. I love to, leadership is my focus. I held an endowed chair in leadership and character development. And so I said, that's my focus. I love to interview people. And he said, well, everybody's he said, there are a lot of people writing leadership books and everybody's got the 7 habits of this or the 10 principles of that. And he said, no one's really tying it together. So he said, why don't you be that person? So why don't you reach out, interview some of the top people and analyze the data and tie it together. So I set off on this journey, and it says sage advice from 100 experts, but I really interviewed more than 100 people, and I continue to interview people. It's just kind of a hobby, and I have a blog and I have a podcast series called Becoming a Sage, and you can learn more about that on my website. But so I started interviewing these people, and that was about in 2005. And about 2010, I was, no, maybe 2009, I was done interviewing people basically for the book. And I started analyzing the data, and then I started contacting publishers. And the book was published by ATD, Association for Training and Development. And each chapter is a theme that emerged out of the research. And so I'm really proud of the book because I think it's timeless. It's not really what I think. It's what I learned from interviewing what I say some of the top thought leaders in the field. Some of these people are now deceased, such as Warren Bennis and William Bridges, a real expert on transitions. Angeles Arian. I integrate a lot of different areas of which I looked for experts. But, I think it's timeless what I learned, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's about
Wow.
leading with wisdom, sage advice from 100 experts.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's actually quite an older book in that you're, before what the internet is now. So that's awesome because good is great. I've got that upstairs and I haven't read it yet. So I'm going to have to read it now that you've met him. And
Yeah,
yeah.
you're gonna have to read it.
Yeah.
I mean, he coined the phrase "good to great,"
Yeah.
so you hear leaders talking about that.
Yeah. Right. Oh, wow.
It was published in 2013, but I really do think the methodology that I used and the analysis that I did, I really think it's timeless. And what's interesting, Jane, is my driving question. I really only had 5 questions, and then I would probe for specifics. But my driving question was, how can I best prepare people to be the kinds of leaders needed in these uncertain times?
Wow.
And since the book was published, the times have only become more uncertain. So I think the book is even more relevant now than when it was published.
Wow. Yeah. I've got the book and I haven't read it yet. So we'll be talking at another time again about the book and leadership. But for now, maybe we could just have a quick summary of it's some of the top tips from the leaders that you also use in your practice, obviously, when you're doing your change management, leadership development, that, you've incorporated it into your own training. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, again, I know this is on your website, but if listeners go to my website, you can download my top 10 tips for leading during crises, and they really come out of my book. But what I would share right now is the fact that leaders during this pandemic, the critical skills are what we call the soft skills. And these are the skills that are often not taught in business schools, in business courses, maybe in organizational behavior or leadership. But the soft skills are those that are they're qualitative, they're not quantitative. I say the answers are not in the back of the book. So the soft skills are those interpersonal, dynamic relationship skills. And when I'm doing workshops and courses and teaching and coaching, I emphasize that leadership is not about a position. It's not about a title. It's about a relationship. And so there's not a time when relationships and creating and cultivating and sustaining and nurturing relationships, there's not a time that's better than right now, because anxiety is high, emotional, everybody's on edge, emotions are very fragile. Leaders need to pay attention to these relationships and listening. leaders don't have to have answers. They need to just listen to what people need and reach out and check in. One of the things that I emphasize in my coaching is for leaders to just check in. You don't have to have an agenda. It doesn't have to be a meeting. Just check in, find out, how are people doing? What are they willing to share? And based on what they're willing to share, then you as a leader can determine what they need. I think that's really critical during these times. So
yeah, that's for sure. That's very exciting. I'm so glad that you're in a certain place that I am in terms of leadership. I think it's very important to have those soft skills. And you're right, they don't teach it in school. I'm not sure why, but maybe you know why. But yeah.
harder. I mean, there are courses. I mean, when I was full time, I taught organizational behavior, which is a soft skill course,
Oh,
leadership. But what I think is interesting, and for your listeners, they can Google this, but at Stanford, there's a course called, it's known as the touchy-feely course, and it's in the Stanford MBA program. And it's like the most popular course on campus because of the reputation it has received over the years. And if your listeners Google this, if they just Google Stanford touchy-feely course, Stanford has just now, their faculty are taking it on the road to corporations because those skills are so desperately needed.
right.
And so it's interesting to me that these are the skills that are lacking in the workplace right now. And when people are stressed and when leaders are stressed and under anxiety, and it's easy to forget that these are the skills that are needed. And if you don't feel comfortable practicing these skills, leaders are likely not to use them when they're needed most. So Stanford's taking this course on the road, and I find that very interesting. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about this. So,
Oh, wow. I'll have to check that one out for sure.
yeah, check it out.
I had a discussion with people. Hopefully, this isn't too. I mean, you know about culture and how there's a problem with cultural differences when you're a leader, and obviously to do leadership. You need to be able to coach them on understanding different cultures. So for sure, just wondering if you could just speak briefly on that, because it's something people don't really talk about because it's sort of taboo in a way for some.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting because, again, as you mentioned in the introduction, I taught for 30 years at an undergraduate. It was a small liberal arts college, and we only had undergraduate courses there. And I created a course. Now, again, I've been gone for 10 years. So, but when I was there for 25 years, I taught a diversity course, and I called it Managing and Valuing Cultural Diversity. And then I created this whole course. And every year when I would teach it, I would say to the students, I hope there's a year when this course is no longer needed, because people just value diversity, they get it, they appreciate it. And of course, we've seen, with the Black Lives Matter and women, Me Too movement, we see where these skills are still lacking big time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that I taught this course for 25 years. Now, what's ironic about it is these kinds of courses, people who tend to take these kinds of courses tend to already appreciate diversity. So so sometimes you're preaching to the choir for the majority of students. They love this, they love it. But in that course, I talked about every aspect of diversity we had a very broad umbrella. Diversity was a broad umbrella that under this umbrella, we would talk about age, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity for sure, social status. We even got into lookism.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm sure I'm forgetting, but we really talked about a wide variety. Disability or
very important. Yeah.
And then I would so they had to do a lot of reading, they had to do a lot of writing, they had to journal. And on every topic, I would bring in a guest speaker, because I said to the students in the syllabus, I said, I'm a white woman. I'm a straight heterosexual white woman. I cannot speak from personal experience from all these different aspects. So I would bring in a guest speaker, and sometimes two, depending on the topic, for every topic. I mean, I would bring in, a former student who was blind because of an accident, but had a corporate job. I would bring in people using a wheelchair. I would bring in a lesbian, woman and a man. I would bring in a lesbian couple who had kids. I would bring in someone from the Jewish perspective, because the college that I taught at was faith-based from a Christian tradition. So I would bring in, someone from the Jewish faith, bring in a Black colleague of mine who's from Ethiopia, bring in, just a whole variety of people. And, again, students would get their eyes open, because it's so easy to just look at life and look at work from their own perspective. So to me, it was a very valuable, very moving course, and I always learned something. I would bring in at least one, if not two people living with AIDS.
Oh.
Because, early on when I first started teaching the course, Jane, it was a time when people thought it was a gay man's disease. That is how our culture has evolved since then. So it was very moving. So you're right. I mean, diversity, it matters. And, today, the whole idea is get over fears, and I would say to the students, you don't have to understand these various aspects of diversity. You may never understand it, but you have to be respectful, because you're going to be working with and for people who are different than you. And the goal is, how can you be fair? And I would say to the students, we all have prejudices, and figure out what they are, because if you don't acknowledge them, you can't overcome them.
For sure.
And I say to the students, okay, I'll share mine. I said, it's been really hard for me with tattoos, because I grew up, when I was younger, tattoos were not politically correct. They weren't acceptable. And it's become like now a fashion statement, and so I said, I've had to really overcome, that I want to be fair, and I want to be, I have to realize that tattoos don't matter, and so I've really had to work on that. So I think when people like myself admit to others, I mean, we're all prejudiced in some way, but we can't overcome that if we don't acknowledge it and address it and be aware of it. That's that acknowledgement piece. Be aware, because the whole goal is we need to be fair. We need to be fair. So it's amazing to me that in 2020, in some ways, we've gone backwards.
Yeah, or some people say the conversation has started again, which is good. But I do have to say, my husband would probably divorce me if I got myself a tattoo, because he has the same prejudice on tattoos. Yeah. But anyway, so what's so exciting is that you're writing your new book, and I do not know what death through a difference is. So I'd love to speak to you to speak on that chapter, because that is so intriguing. I would say.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to answer a few questions here with that question. First of all, my book, I've created this concept called breadcrumb legacy. And breadcrumb legacy, I often say in workshops or courses or when I'm speaking, when do we leave our legacy? And people will say, well, when we leave. Okay, well, what do you mean by leave? Well, when we die, when we retire, when we leave a job. And I'll say, that's true. All of that's very true. But we're leaving it all the time. What about when we leave this meeting? What about when I leave this interview with Jane right now? I am leaving some breadcrumbs behind for all of your listeners, for all of your, everyone in your audience. I'm leaving some breadcrumbs right now. And sometimes breadcrumbs are positive, sometimes they're not so positive. And so when we're aware of this, I think we live our life more intentional and more thoughtful and respectful. if we care about the trail we're leaving behind. And so my book is all about breadcrumb legacy. I don't really have an official title yet. I'm working on the chapters, but one of the chapters is called Death Through a Different Lens. And what this is about is, and really this book is an outgrowth of my last book, Leading with Wisdom, because one of my conclusions in that book is it's hard to be a good leader if you're not a good person.
Mm.
So I'm kind of picking up where I left off. And so this breadcrumb legacy book, it's really about how to be a good leader and how to be a good person. And one of the big fears in life is this whole idea of death. And so I developed a leadership course based on what I was learning during my research with Leading with Wisdom. And one of the things that I was learning is the sages said, leaders need to learn about death, dying, and grief because industries are dying, companies are dying, positions are evaporating, and people are dealing with a lot of grief. And what I find fascinating, Jane, is during the pandemic, death has become up close and personal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting death counts by county, by state, by country, by city. I mean, death is up close and personal. And we're reading about it, hearing about it. In fact, in my local newspaper, they're featuring, every Sunday, they're featuring people who have died within the state, died from COVID.
Oh, wow.
So, it's kind of a take on 9/11 where remembering these people because they're not just numbers. It's easy to just think of them as statistics, and they're not statistics. They're people and they have families. And so this whole concept is this whole idea of death is very personal. And so when I really did kind of a deep dive when the sages said, you need to be teaching leaders about death, dying, and grief, because these are skills not taught in business courses. And they were not skills that I taught in my qualitative soft skill courses. So I started integrating them, and I found out that sharing what I was learning and really teaching people about grief, and I've got exercises and assignments and activities that they had to do, but teaching them about this, I found that students, 20 to 22-year-olds, it really resonated with them. That, when I would present papers about this at conferences, academic conferences, my colleagues, my peers would say, how does this go over with 20 to 22-year-olds? Aren't they too young to get this? And I would say, no, it really resonates with them. And my theory is the earlier they have these skills, the younger they are, the better off they are. They live their life differently because, and we can go into more of that.
Yeah,
but,
for sure. Yeah, next time. You've got so many topics to talk about. This is so new. And that's one thing I never thought about until I turned 50. Yeah. So.
There you go. There you go. So the younger people are, when they understand this, I think the better off they are.
Yeah, for sure. They do things differently. That's so great. So this is actually going to be a leadership book in that it'll be still about your leadership and change management and everything.
Yeah, it really, it's going to kind of cross over into a couple genres in terms of leadership and human development and, life.
And you had another chapter, which of course is intriguing, become a nobody. I'm not sure why I would want to become a nobody. So
yeah, well, it's kind of interesting, and it goes along with legacy work in terms of we spend basically the first half of our life becoming a somebody. Whether it's in school, college, in our career, we really want to become a somebody. Who are we becoming? And the last half of our life is more about becoming a nobody. It's really about, one of my peers in this area, she talks about the shift from goal to role or goal to soul. So like the first half of your life, it's all about goals. And the second half of your life, it's all about, what role do you want to play in life or soul? what's your soul telling you to do? And so that's really about, kind of what that become a nobody is. The second half of life, it's really about what can you, what kind of impact do you have on others, or are you having on others, or what do you want to have on others? And that's more the soul and role versus the goal. Anyway,
that's a
wonderful. Become a nobody is, really letting go of the ego. It's not all about you anymore.
Right.
It's about what difference are you making.
Yeah. I know that a lot of time now I'm thinking about legacy and can I make a difference in even in a small way with other people. And that's why I'm doing this as well myself, because I don't have to do this. I'm 62, but I want to leave a legacy. I want to be able to change at least some people's others lives. So yeah. So we're gonna probably wrap up for today. I'm definitely gonna have you again because we have so much to talk about. I think next time we'll talk about your old book. But today, I just wanted to find out from you on your website. I forgot to ask you. I didn't realize you had a podcast. So what's that about? And
yeah, I do have a podcast called Becoming a Sage. And actually, I just created a private Facebook group. If people went to Facebook and hit search, it's called Becoming a Sage. And that's about creating more of a conversation with people who want to talk about positive aging, conscious aging, leading with wisdom. That's what that's about. But I have a monthly podcast where I interview some of the top thought leaders in the field of positive aging. And if they subscribe to my website, they would get it in email. So again, that's once a month. And if they just went to Jann Fried with 2 N's and 2 E's, if they went to Jann Fried podcast, if they just Googled that, my previous podcast would pop up.
Oh, wow.
I interviewed people. I had a leadership summit last summer in June, and those are posted on my YouTube site.
Oh.
And I was asking some influencers, leaders at all ages, how they think leadership is going to change based on the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And they go to my YouTube channel. They just, again, Google Jann Fried YouTube, or go to search for Jann Fried at YouTube. Each one of those interviews is listed. I interviewed Bill George, the former CEO of Medtronics in Minneapolis. I interviewed a variety of people.
Wow.
Some professors who write about leadership at the University of Michigan. I interviewed a whole variety of people. Some of the top executive coaches. I interviewed Sally Helgeson, who writes a lot about women's leadership. She has many books out. I interviewed a lot of people, and I would encourage people to go to my YouTube channel then. And that really is focused on leadership, how that might change during, because of the pandemic. So,
oh, wow.
I'm staying busy. You're just busy. Like you. Again, I don't have to do this, but I'm learning a lot. And my mission is to continue to learn and share what I'm learning with others. Yeah. And I do that with writing, blogging, podcasts.
And of course, consulting. Yeah, for sure. So if anyone wants to talk to you about leadership consulting and change management, do they just go to your website, or?
I would say go to my website. I've got a contact page. They can just send me an email, and that'd be wonderful. Oh. I'd love to hear from some people.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
I do want to say I met Jane through this Give-A-Toss.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That was started by Dan Pink.
Yeah.
And, it's all about giving and helping others. And so I want to thank Jane for helping me.
Yeah.
And I've offered to help Jane in any way possible. So.
Yeah. We've got good vibrations.
Good vibrations. I like that.
Yeah. I love Dan Pink, and I've got all his books, but that Give-A-Toss has been really good for me, and getting a lot of people to volunteer for coming on and interviewing, which is great. So I'd like to thank you, Jann, for coming on today and spending some time with me. And we'll be spending more time for sure. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Yeah. For a copy of Dr. Jann's book, Leading with Wisdom, go to Amazon. And for a free copy of the top 10 tips for leading during crises, go to www.jann.freed.com. And you can search for her podcast, Becoming the Sage, as well. On Facebook, she has a private Facebook group for those who would like to talk further about becoming a sage. Thank you for listening. For more, go to findingyourpurposetv.com, where you'll find out more information on values, leadership, finding your purpose. Thanks for listening.